You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
One more time here, Sons of the Shoe back with you guys. Nick Wilson, Spencer German, and as always, as we are a relatively new podcast, please make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, 923thefan.com, the free Odyssey app. Have I mentioned Apple? We depend and we thrive on your guys' support. So follow Sons of the Shoe wherever you get your podcasts and the 923 The Fan YouTube channel. If you haven't been there yet, 923 The Fan. Punch that into the search bar on YouTube. And then make sure to find us under the podcast or the playlist banners there. And please, interact with our videos. We love hearing from you guys. And Spencer, hi, first off.
Yeah, you said one more time. It makes me think that the show's ending or something. I don't know. That made me a little bit nervous here at the top of the show. But do you know something I don't know?
Full disclosure. Sometimes when I speak, things come out and I can talk them into making sense, and sometimes they just kind of float out there in the ether. I plan on going nowhere. This podcast is very healthy. We are a robust show, and we will continue on into the future. Although, can I just...
So long as I don't use the T word. That's the key, right? As long as I don't use that word, the show will continue.
That's more about you. I don't have to replace you with Anthony Lima, okay? I'm just looking out for you, because here's the thing. Lima is one of the...
Would Lima be around... I was going to say, is Lima allowed to... I thought so.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. I can't make any more comments on that because I don't need to get called into a meeting today. But yes, Lima uses the hard T many times. So it's funny. So we're going to get into something that I think is an insane comment to have on Ohio State football. What I can tell you is today we have one episode this week because it's a bye week for Ohio State. Marshall coming up on the 21st. The week after is Michigan State, then Iowa, and then Oregon. But what I can say is I absolutely hate week 3 buys. I just like you didn't play on week 0. You didn't play now in what's technically week 3. Well, okay, it's technically week 3, but it is week 4. So the first month of college football, my taste is a booty kicking of Akron and a booty kicking of Western Michigan. I'm going to need a little bit better from the schedule makers in Columbus there.
It's funny. I was kind of thinking about that too, because I am going to be out of town this weekend. And so I was kind of anticipating, I was anticipating like, oh yeah, shoot, like Ohio State game Saturday. How am I going to record with Nick? I'm going to be on a plane. Like, what's going to happen? Blah, blah, blah. How's this going to work? And then I went and checked the schedule, and I was like, obviously I did this like a couple weeks ago. And I wasn't doing that just this week. I understood that I mentioned in the post-game show over the weekend that Ohio State was on a bye this week. But it kind of struck me as I was kind of thinking ahead on this trip that I have. I was like, oh, it's a bye week, so I don't have to worry about that. Thank God. And then I was like, wait a minute. They have a bye week after playing Akron and Western Michigan on week 3 of the season? And I was kind of perplexed by that too. I was like, even though it's helping me, like they're doing me a favor here, I still was very perplexed at the thought that they play 2 games against very inferior opponents, and then they're like, let's just squeeze in a bye here randomly before we play another team that is very much inferior to us in Marshall in 2 weeks.
You're telling me my kid's birthday party is coming up this Saturday. Now, here's the problem. When my wife asked me about this day, she knew Sunday's off, the Browns are there. Yeah. So she asked me, are the Browns playing a Saturday game, just to be sure? And I was like, no, they're not. And I have no conflicts. And I got so lucky because if I had to eke away, or if I had to play the Ohio State game at my kid's 14th birthday party, your boy might be a single dad very, very quickly there. And honestly, I would deserve it.
I mean, we could have pivoted. We could have done the show at halftime instead and given you the rest of the show, because it's probably going to be over at halftime if we're being honest with ourselves. But yeah, I mean, we could have made it work somehow.
We're leaving it up to fate at that point. So I trust that you would have worked with me. But man, anything that ended with me doing a podcast this Saturday with all the things. Listen, my wife, she's so wonderful.
Well, we didn't. The other thing too, real quick, we didn't have this problem last year because the podcast didn't start until like the first week of October. So
that's true.
You avoided it, so it probably wasn't even really on your radar. Like, oh, I didn't have any issues last year. Why would I have issues this year? So I get that.
That's true. It's and by the way, I have to remind myself every week that we have the post-game podcast, which now we've been doing for almost a year. But my wife is so sweet. All right, she's so loyal. She's wonderful. I think she's the most beautiful woman in the world. All right. I think so much of my wife. The one thing that maybe she is maybe not on the level with all those other amazing qualities is when we host birthday parties for kids. You've heard of Bridezilla. Partyzilla is a real thing. Momzilla comes out when you have to plan birthday parties, especially as my kids get older and they start to ask for more things in it, and that requires more of both of us as we juggle to get stuff on the ground. So, and like telling me, real quick, keeps telling me 30 people. We got 30 people. And I was like, you've told me this number 45 times. I know that we have to. It's like, no, do you understand? We have to order pizza for 30 people. And I don't know how to say, like, I just, the best way to handle this is, yes, dear. And honestly, in my vernacular, it might be the toughest thing I have to say.
I can relate. My wife, too, gets very stressed when we host birthday parties. We've only done 2 of them so far, and she's like that. And I don't blame her because it is a very stressful thing. Got people coming over the house. You want everything to look nice. You want the party to go well. You want people to have good food. So I understand all that. But yeah, she always says in those moments that I look at her sometimes like she's going to eat me, because I just kind of look at her and try to like really listen to what she's telling me so that I don't forget. And I'm sure it probably does look like I'm a deer in headlights. So I get where she's coming from.
It's probably not great that I'm actually listening to you face is one of fear.
On those days, that is definitely what it is. Yes,
absolutely. So we should call today's podcast Dispelling Narratives about this Ohio State team, because now granted, this conversation was germinated, sorry for the pun there, germinated by a conversation I had with our station's chief Michigan fan, Keith Britton, also known as the Assassin, also known as the Marble Mouth of Crawford County, because we're talking about Ohio State this week in one of our pre-show meetings. And for Afternoon Drive, 2 to 7 on 92.3 The Fan, make sure to follow us and listen every day from 2 to 7. And all the, 6 a.m. to midnight, the whole damn lineup, but mostly from 2 to 7. But, so we're talking, and he's like, man, isn't Ohio State's dominance boring? And it's funny because I was the only person in the room. There were 4 of us. You were not here, by the way, I should specify. You'll be with me tomorrow on Friday. But every person was like, yeah, it kind of is. And I said, hold the effing phone. Because if they came out, and let's say they played Texas week 1, and they eked by on a 3-point victory, people would be saying the opposite. People would be saying, well, yeah, Texas is a great team, but why isn't Ohio State beating them by 15 points, $30 million team, all this other stuff? And I just think it's wild that we've gotten to a point where we're so cynical with Ohio State under Ryan Day that we can't even give like the modicum of credit, which is you've played 2 teams that you are leagues above, and it is shown, and you've kicked the holy crap out of both teams. Why does it have to be boring? Why can't it just be, oh, well, Ohio State's doing exactly what we thought against the teams and exactly what they should do against the teams that they're miles and leagues ahead of?
Well, I do think it's also kind of rich, as you mentioned, Keith being our resident Michigan fan, that on the weekend that his team lost, all of a sudden he's like, hey, winning every game by 50, that's boring. I mean, You got to lose one every now and then to have a little bit of fun. So I don't know. Like, I'm with you. Like, these are teams that Ohio State should beat. And we knew that going in. But every year, this is kind of how the schedule is set up. Now, maybe that starts to change a little bit with the 12-team playoff. We've talked about that before, where maybe now these top tier teams would be more inclined to schedule tougher opponents outside of their conference in the early weeks of the season, because they know, like, okay, yeah, if we lose this season opening game to Texas or Alabama or whatever, we can bounce back from it and still have a chance to make the playoffs. Unlike Notre Dame, who lost to Northern Illinois and may not have a chance to recover from that. We'll see. But regardless, like, it's like that's I understand that premise, but we still use these games as like barometers for, like, okay, where is Ohio State at? And I said this on the post-game show. The biggest difference to me, Nick, in these first two games versus like previous years against inferior teams is that you saw them play inferior teams the last couple of years, this stretch of the schedule, and there would be things that those inferior teams would still sort of show Ohio State had issues. Like, it was like, oh, we can run the ball really well on you, even though they still lose by 40 points. And it was like, okay, they still won the game, but I saw some issues here. Or maybe it was like, oh, they struggle with dual threat quarterbacks, or where's Ohio State's pass rush? That was the big thing I brought up on Saturday, because the last couple of years, it's felt like no matter who they were playing, their pass rush just could not get home. And we have not, like, these first 2 weeks, we have seen like total dominance, aside from maybe a slow start from the offense in the first week, where it seems like they really have everything rolling. The group is really together. And you're not really seeing a lot of those weaknesses. So I still think there's enough to take away from this. I don't think it's boring at all. Like, we're 2 weeks into a fresh season of Ohio State football. We know better games are coming. But if you're the average everyday Ohio State fan, you're kind of used to this. Like, you know that the early portion of the schedule is going to be some cupcakes. And then once you get to Big Ten play, all bets are off. And maybe you have a game at Iowa that's a little tougher, or maybe you play in Oregon now that's in the Big Ten that could be a little tougher, like Ohio State does. And that's where it really becomes, a tougher task. But I don't think it's boring whatsoever. Like, I think people are very excited about this team, as they should be.
I'm totally okay if you want to say, like Danny Cannell was on Afternoon Drive with me on 92 Through the Fan yesterday at 6 o'clock, if you want to use the rewind function on the Odyssey app. And Danny was like,
yesterday is Wednesday, by the way.
Yes, Wednesday. That's a good point.
Later, yeah.
Since this is out there,
you have 72 hours to use the rewind function in the Odyssey app and go back.
Wednesday, September 11th. Oh man, it didn't feel great to promote that there. Now, but Danny was on yesterday and he was like, I just don't know how much I can grade, whether it's Will Howard or anybody else on this. That's fair. If you want to say, like, I don't know how much I can really take away from these games, okay. I mean, I think the offensive line has been disappointing through 2 games. I think Will Howard has shown, like, the little things that I need to see, which are the little things that Kyle McCord didn't show last year. But, like, I understand that, like, until you get to maybe even Iowa and maybe potentially Oregon, you can't answer the biggest questions about this team. But the boring thing is the one that, like, for me, I'll be honest with you. I look at Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, even Michigan State, although that's an in-conference game. I look at the non-conference games, out-of-conference games, and I say, oh, this is kind of like this is like the worry-free zone of the Ohio State season. So I expect to blow them out. I'm not bored when they do. So I don't go into these games. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for progress. I'm looking for bright spots. I'm looking for any kind of sign, as we talked about with the O-line. I think what's boring is when you get into the Big Ten, and there are about 4 or 5 schools right now that are spending half of what Ohio State spends on a yearly basis on football. So in no way are Indiana, Purdue, Illinois, there's one other, Maryland, in no way, even Rutgers to some degree, in no way are those 4 or 5 schools prioritizing football in any way. And it's not as if they're prioritizing anything else. They're basically the Pittsburgh Pirates owners. They're just cashing that check and content with being a 4-win team and a 2-win team in the Big Ten. That's what, like, when you have to play non-competitive Big Ten teams, I'd rather see them kicked out of the division or the conference, and other, like, better football schools, teams that are apt to spend on their programs, come in, like North Carolina, like Miami, like Florida State, like Clemson. Like, that to me, like, the Big Ten still having too much fat at the bottom as compared to the fat at the bottom of the SEC. That's what bugs me more than anything. And that's the thing. That's where I get bored, is when you're about to put 50 on Michigan State.
Well, and another reason I don't find it boring too, Nick, is because, like, think about the context of this Ohio State team and everything that transpired this all season. I mean, we were talking about just how they use the transfer portal, the guys that they brought in, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, etc., Will Howard. Like, these first two games and even the Marshall game, this is our first chance to see these guys in action. I mean, we're going to talk, I know, at some point during this episode about Jeremiah Smith and his amazing start to his Ohio State and college career. Like, that's another guy. This is our first chance to see him in action. Like, that alone, those names alone get you through the door at Ohio in terms of watching Ohio State, where you're like, yeah, I understand it's Akron and Western Michigan and Marshall, but to see Will Howard for the first time and how he's going to command this offense, to see how they use Quinshon Judkins versus Trevion Henderson, to see Jeremiah Smith have arguably the greatest start to an Ohio State career as a freshman ever. Like, those are the things that I think make this an exciting team to still watch, whether they're blowing people out or not, because you have these new names. And yes, now after we get through this Marshall game next weekend, that's where it becomes, okay, now you get to Big Ten play. You mentioned Michigan State. I think Michigan State's actually going to be a little bit of a tougher team than we initially thought. I think they played a really good game against Maryland, and they certainly have some fight in them. So I'm curious as we kind of break down that game and kind of see some things, what it's all going to look like. But yeah, I mean, like, it's different once you get into conference play for sure. But I just think there's enough meat on the bones here with this team in terms of things that interest us, that they're very much worth watching. Yes, and it's not boring.
All right, guys, want to hear from you. Are you bored by how dominant Ohio State has been? That is a take that originated with a Michigan fan on my show, but other Ohio State fans in the room did agree, and I was appalled by it. But we do have to talk about Jeremiah Smith's big debut as a freshman. We also have to talk about Will Howard's first start. That's next. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. I think because the way you framed it, you said the phrase Will Howard versus Kyle McCord. And I think we can say that Will Howard, through two games, even though it's Western Michigan and Akron, looks like an upgrade over Kyle McCord, while also giving Kyle McCord his flowers for the way he's played two games in Syracuse. Are we allowed to do that? Or because I was anti-McCord in Ohio, at Ohio State, that am I not allowed to do that?
No, I mean, I think people are going to want you to pick sides, because that's what they always want, a staunch, debate. And, well, no, you can't have both. It has to be one or the other. And that's kind of a hotly debated thing right now. I will say this, even Ryan Day, as robotic as he can be, threw some flowers at the feet of Kyle McCord. He said he hadn't seen a lot of the tape just yet, but he saw some of the highlights, and he looks like he's doing a great job. He's happy to see him having a good season. So I was like, okay, hey, he's giving him some props. That's cool. What I'll say, though, is this. First of all, the level of competition, granted, Will Howard hasn't played anybody great yet, and so I think it's okay to say that Will Howard still has to prove it on a different stage to this point before we really feel like, okay, yeah, he's 100% an upgrade over Kyle McCord. I don't know that we know that after these first two games playing two inferior teams. Now, I still believe that in my heart he is, because I just think there's a better skill set there, the fact that he can run, all these different things. But I'm not going to sit here and act like Kyle McCord is – like we saw Kyle McCord last year, guys. Like, we know what he brings to the table. I'm not saying what he is doing isn't impressive, but he's doing it at Syracuse. He's doing it against opponents that I would imagine Will Howard would also put up similar numbers against if he was playing them. I just can't go there and just make it a contest between the two where it's like, well, I'm having buyer's remorse now that Kyle McCord is somehow better. And I will say this too. I do think that on some level, it does feel like Kyle McCord, in his separation from Ohio State, has kind of, I think from a personality standpoint, he's become more free in a way. I don't know what the reasoning for that is. Like, I don't know how much maybe Ryan Day was restricting him from that standpoint or whatever, or if it's just like another year of maturity where he's now, learned a lot about himself and he feels more confident. Whatever it might be, I just think you can tell there's like more personality there. I mean, there was a clip going around of him saying like he was calling Georgia Tech like a sorry team with a choice of words there. And there was like, I don't know, like he's clearly showing more personality. He's clearly playing at a very high level. Tip of the cap to you, Kyle McCord. But I'm also not sitting here like, oh, I need that guy back, because we saw what it looked like with him last year. I'm just not there.
Yeah, like, and one, I think we do this all the time. We certainly did it week 1, where people are like, look at his box score. And I'm like, are you okay? I'm not watching him play. So I can't see, as Brian Day said, watch the tape. Like I have watched the tape with Will Howard. And what I see are things that I just didn't see with Kyle last year. All right. So, and that, like, most importantly, it's ball placement. I think Will Howard's ball placement, and it's 2 games against inferior competition. It does speed up here, but his ball placement is honestly some of the best ball placement I've seen of a quarterback. Like ridiculous in the palm, in the pocket. Also, the other part is, and I think this is especially important if Ohio State's offensive line turns out to just be okay or even above average, but not great. The movement of Will Howard has been even more impressive than I kind of expected. So, I think buyer's remorse is disingenuous.
Yeah.
Even if, by the way, Kyle McCord right now with the Georgia Tech win has a better win than anything you've got.
That's fair. Yeah.
But like I will at some point sit down and watch Kyle and see, has the ball placement changed? Has his decision making sped up? Has his feel? And by the way, I kind of like if Kyle McCord uses this scenario as a chip on the shoulder and uses that as a springboard to something, I kind of like it. I like the attitude. One of the things, and you mentioned the robotic thing from last year, he was kind of a bland nothing on the field and off the field.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that was the pressure. I wonder how much of that was the noise. And there's a part of me that wonders that if maybe leaving Ohio State, he can become a better player going forward than he ever would have been at Ohio State, because he can use this as kind of motivation. So like this is a rare spot where I might come out of this with a lot more respect of Kyle, the player, and the person, but it doesn't mean on any level I have any sort of buyer's remorse, no matter whether Syracuse is a 9-win team or Ohio State wins a national championship this year with Will Howard or not.
Yeah, and I mean, and here's the thing too. Like, I think he, again, I don't know what the difference is there in terms of like the personality, but I do think like you go to a place like Syracuse and he had the situation play out in the all season where he was considering transferring, kind of saw the writing on the wall that he had to compete for the job again at Ohio State. And it's kind of like a all bets are off situation for him, or like he has, maybe it's more like this. It's more like he has nothing to lose. He has nothing to lose at this point. At Ohio State, there's a lot to lose because there's so much pressure on that team constantly. Like, you got to deliver in those moments. I mean, he saw the wrath of the fans after every single game where he played just okay. He saw the wrath of the fans after the Michigan game. People were blaming him for the 2 interceptions that he threw, even though one was definitely his fault and the other maybe more so on the offensive line. But still, it's like he saw that. And at Syracuse, they haven't seen good quarterback play since pre-2000 with Donovan McNabb. Like, they appreciate the fact that they're loving the fact that he's playing at a high level. They're winning football games because of it. And he's going to be absolutely adored there if he plays at that level. But like, I can't get out of my head him throwing the ball 10 feet over the head of like Julian Fleming on like, hook or on curl routes near the side. Like, there was too many plays where we saw he just didn't have it. And again, maybe that changes with a maturity in year 2 and you kind of see things better and all that. I'm not saying that can't be true, but I think it was probably best for both parties that they ended up moving on. And that can be true along with the fact that he's also playing well and that Will Howard could be a better fit for Ohio State. Now, what I will say for Will Howard, he definitely has to hit the easy throws because he missed that throw to Jeremiah Smith on last Saturday. And I talked about this in the post-game show where Jeremiah Smith was wide open down the field and he like threw it. He got it. It was a very, very short pass. And that was the one thing I did like it, love it, leave it. And that was the thing that I left was he's got to hit that one. He looked good the rest of the game, but he's got to hit that one. And like that's the problem. If Kyle McCord keeps playing well and Will Howard misses throws like that, it's just going to keep coming back. I'm not saying he's going to care or whatever, that we should care, but it's just going to keep coming back where it's like, Kyle McCord, way he's playing, he might have hit that throw this year. And so he's got to at least, in those moments, he's got to make those throws. Yes.
Well, but with the McCord thing, one interpretation or one report and one avenue we went down was whether Kyle McCord left because he was told he was going to have to compete with Devin Brown and the young quarterbacks. And if that was his response, you should have even less seller's remorse, right? Like you should, because if his thing was, I feel like I've earned this.
I mean, Devin Brown's been told 3-4 different times now that he's not the starting quarterback, and he just continues to say, hey, that's just not how I was raised. Like I compete. That's what I do. I'm not just going to quit.
Yep. And by the way, it might have been that Syracuse gave him a nicer bag in NIL. It might have been
don't forget, he was looking at Nebraska too.
Yeah.
First.
Man. I'm not going to go down to I'm not going to give Nebraska love yet. I got to give Matt Rule some credit at some point in any of my shows. But so like it's just such a weird, disingenuous conversation. And I just think Will has shown a lot of what I hoped he would. And so I think as you move into Marshall and then Michigan State and Iowa and certainly the Oregon game, I think I'm as excited that this thing is going to work out. And the idea that Ohio State should do it differently, playing good football at Syracuse, the stakes are different. You kind of highlighted it, right? Like whether Syracuse wins 7 games or 9 games or just makes a bowl or wins 9 games, if they win 9 games,
that's like that's like Syracuse's back for them. Like 9 wins
is the
like
national championship for Syracuse.
Yeah, like that. I mean that they haven't seen. I mean, I shouldn't say that because they have had some. There was a couple years like they beat Clemson that one year and like a big upset, and they've had some competitive teams in recent years under Dino Babers before he was obviously run out of town. But it's like, I mean, I like 9 wins at Syracuse is like, okay, that's a really good season. Like fans would feel really good about that. Ohio State, though, like it's just different. Like you are expected to be in the national championship conversation every single year. And we saw last year, Kyle McCord, he cracked a little bit in that with that kind of bearing down on him.
Now, I think what'll be really interesting is if both guys continue to produce at this level and Will goes out and there's a playoff run and you beat Michigan and maybe you win a national championship or come close, and McCord goes 9-4 at Syracuse and continues to put up these gaudy numbers. From the NFL perspective, it'll be really interesting to see how they fare because McCord is not what anybody's looking for in the NFL right now as a specifically just a drop back quarterback. There have been some, precision concerns as well, but his numbers might look better than McCord or than Will Howard's, and Will Howard's a little older.
Yeah.
So those will be 2 guys to compare once we get to draft season and see how the NFL fares, because each has a strike against them in the book of NFL scouts, one for precision and lack of mobility, the other for age and 1 or 2. And honestly, he still has to prove himself at this level as well with Will Howard. It'll be interesting. That'll be a fascinating thing there. So,
well, what about a potential Syracuse-Ohio State playoff match? What if somehow Syracuse makes it in? Just saying, 12 teams, field's a little more wide open. ACC, there's only really one team right now that seems like a big threat. Maybe Syracuse has a shot. I'm just saying. That would be fun, though. Will Howard versus Kyle McCord in a playoff game.
Well, and the only thing is we're probably not going to get it at Ohio Stadium, which would make it more fun, right? Because I'm assuming Ohio State's going to get one of the buys to the second round, be a top 4 seed. But if Ohio State was like the 5 seed and Syracuse was the 12 seed, that'd be a hell of a lot of fun. So obviously, guys, we want to know, do you guys have any seller's remorse on Kyle McCord, the old McCord versus Howard debate? We've got 4 Down territory coming up. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, guys, final segment of the show. We'll get to 4-down territory in a moment, but with no Ohio State game this weekend, usually we might do something like the Michigan Panic Meter here, but Michigan is hosting Arkansas State. And I think this is an interesting matchup. Michigan should get this win, so I'm not saying that. But given what Michigan is not getting out of the quarterback spot, Davis Warren looks like just a guy, and Alex Orji seems to only be a running threat. Like they don't seem to be using him in the pass game. I do think the quarterback.
Sharon Moore did sign his contract this week, though.
Got that done right after that Texas
Made
game.
sure he was like, hey, I can't lose another one, or they might not keep me around. Better get this thing signed real quick.
Man, what a dumb play by Michigan. You had
easy out.
They should have slow played it. They should have just been like, we can't find the paperwork, but we'll get it to you. But so it's interesting that we're having this conversation. I do think because Michigan does not look to have anything at their quarterback spot, all due respect to Davis Warren, who is a senior, neither of these guys look even remotely good. That does have them on upset watch until somebody rises to the occasion and takes over the quarterback job. Am I again, I'm not saying Arkansas State should beat them. I'm just saying
I think that's fair. I mean, anytime you have serious questions like that, and I think they are obviously a team sort of in rebuild. We know their defense is very good, and I think that's the reason they probably win a game like this weekend and maybe sneak out some others, beat some other solid teams this year. But yeah, when you have questions like that and the quarterback position just isn't playing well, it's a recipe for having doubts going into any game and kind of wondering they could be on upset watch. I'm curious, Nick, how did you enjoy and bask in Michigan losing to Texas this weekend? And the fact that real quick, it felt like it was funny. Michigan fans, they were riding high from the championship so much that it was like, we're the champs, blah, blah, blah. And then the second they lost, they pivoted real quick to everything that we've been saying, which is we lost a lot of people. So, it's just that kind of year. But they were they got knocked off the pedestal real quick, it seemed like, on Saturday.
How did I enjoy it? Well, I bathed myself in oils. And as I was nude, I had Vanessa feed me a grape at a time.
She giving you a sponge bath, too?
As I watched Michigan get shit kicked at home to a Texas team. No, I mean, that was what I expected.
Yeah.
I was surprised that line was only 7.5 points, given that even though it was in the big house up in Michigan. But yeah, I enjoy it? Sure did. Let's get to 4-down territory here, because speaking of that game, now that Quinn Ewers, former Ohio State backup, beat Michigan and beat Michigan's pants off this last weekend, Ohio State fans are claiming Quinn Ewers once again.
Yes, it was embarrassing, Nick. Our good friend on 92 Through the Fan, who comes on with you weekly on, we'll do this plug again, Afternoon Drive, 2 to 7 on 92 Through the Fan. Use the rewind function to go back and give it a listen over the last 72 hours. Our good friend Albert Breer even tweeted a picture of Quinn Ewers in Ohio State jersey, and he said, "We still love you," at Quinn Ewers. Like that, to me, all due respect to Albert, because he's a great person, great guy, does a great job covering the NFL. It was embarrassing. It was not even just for Albert, because he wasn't the only one. It was just embarrassing. You can't be out here bowing at the feet of Quinn Ewers, who spent all of 1 hour in an Ohio State uniform and then walks around. I said it last week, I was glad he was leaning into the whole thing and playing up that team up north. And I was happy that he was probably going to beat Michigan. And he did, soundly. It was fun to watch. But I'm not sitting here now treating him like Joe Burrow, where I'm like, oh yeah, he's one of us. No, he's not. He's not.
I think he's
a carpet-bagging son of a gun. That's what he is.
I think that Ohio State fans' feelings on Quinn Ewers could change very quickly here, because Texas and Ohio State are two of the top 5 teams in the country right now.
Yeah.
And they could be on a collision course here in late December, in January. So Quinn Ewers, to me, is looking a lot more like the enemy, or the potential enemy, that he is a friend. And listen, I enjoyed watching him beat that ass of Michigan. I did. Thank you, Quinn. But all Quinn Ewers did at Ohio State was drink slushies at the local 7-Eleven, take NIL money, attend a few classes, and ball a bunch of Ohio State.
Yes.
That's all he did. So, hey, man, congrats on the sex. Thanks for giving some of the chosen daughters of Ohio some primo D, but like, horns down on this one, although not horns down on Quinn. I think he's a good player, but yeah, no.
I agree.
Now, we move on the second down of 4-down territory. Dylan Raiola continues to, and coming off a dominating win of Colorado, Dylan Raiola continues to steal the look of Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes himself has commented on it there.
Yeah, he said it was cool. He's like, oh, yeah, I think it's great. I used to copy A-Rod.
Yeah. Is it cool or weird?
It's 100% weird, dude. Like, it's okay. So it's one thing for him to like do his little celebration. There was like the video going around, like it was like the cut, the top and the bottom. I probably should have found. This would have been a good thing to find for the video audience here. But like, there was like a cut that was going on around social media where Dylan was on the top, Patrick was on the bottom, and it was like he runs down the field, jumps in the air 2 times, lifts his knees really high, and then like lands and like puts his arms down and screams, and he does it like to a T, copies his like celebration. Okay, I can understand. Like people used to copy like Ray Lewis's celebration for fun, like that really liked Ray, like whatever. I don't care that he copies a celebration, but the reason that this goes to the extreme is like same number, same hairstyle, same goatee, wife. Same facial hair. Yeah, at some point we're gonna find out that Brittany Mahomes is leaving Patrick Mahomes for some younger D and jumping on the Dylan Raiola train, and she's gonna run off with him or something like that because he, like, who knows? Maybe he is gonna come steal his wife at some point. I
like the idea it's plural marriage. I like the idea that she'll marry
Mormons.
Both of them.
They're just Mormons.
Like people accuse her of being a gold digger, even though they've been together since they were 14.
High school, yeah.
She's like an advanced scout of epic proportions.
She wasn't a gold digger, but she was also very smart and like, hey, I shouldn't fuck this up. I should probably stick around.
But I do like the idea that she's like, Pat, I love you, but we can get another $400 million.
Maybe more, because by the time Dylan Raiola's in the NFL getting second contract, these contracts might be $500 million. So who knows? But yeah, it is definitely weird. Like, imagine, Nick, if I said, "Gee, my favorite host at 92.3 The Fan is Nick Wilson, and I grew a beard and started wearing a backwards hat all the time and just gouged myself with Chick-fil-A for months on end, and then showed up to work and looked just like you." Wouldn't you think that's a little creepy?
Okay, that's weirder. So here's the thing. My basic rule on this is I think it's cool for now.
Does Dylan have a dad bod too? That's the next phase. You have to find out if he has a dad bod.
I think it's cool for now. I think it's cute now. In another 2 years, if Dylan has not created his own identity, if he's still, I've got the same haircut and I've got the same number and I do the same celebration, then it'll be weird. But just a freshman walking in, I'm actually, you know what? I'm giving him what Jonathan Peterlin calls the Peterlin pass on this one, because he's young and because in 2 games he's given Nebraska more hope than I think they've had in the previous 7 years. He's really good, and it'll be interesting to see how he can progress. We've had a lot of really good young freshman quarterbacks. Josh Rosen, to name one, that we thought 3 years from now, number 1 pick in the draft, and they've gone by the wayside. So it's not like a lock that he's going to be great, but he's a really nice football player. And even if Nebraska is more of a 7 or 8 win team this year, within Dylan Raiola's time there in Nebraska, I think they can be a really good team because, what that Colorado game showed you was how bad Colorado is in the trenches and how dominating on both sides of the ball Matt Rule's Nebraska team is. That's a really, really good Nebraska team.
And
in the trenches.
Just think, that could have been, we could have had the clone of Patrick Mahomes at Ohio State. That was the thing at one point. He's in Nebraska instead.
Moving to third down. Florida State has crapped the bed this season. It's not been pretty. Everybody knows it. But you've got this video of Florida State players
all right.
running around with water guns you want to play, yes?
Oh, real. Oh, yeah, you can see it in the background there.
Yeah.
Too. They're at practice. And this is only like, if you're not watching, we'll describe it for you. There's just a shot. Is DJ? I don't even know which quarter.
It keeps muting you when you play it.
Okay. Is that DJ taking the snap there? I couldn't really tell. But regardless, they have a shot of DJ, the Uyunglele, or what is it? You know it better than me.
Uyunglele.
That was close.
No, you actually said the sounds right, but you said that
funny, yeah.
in a different cadence.
I kind of forgot how to say. I used to know how to say his name, and then I forgot because he's kind of been off the radar for a couple of years.
Because he's been forgettable.
Yeah, because he's been very bad. But that's not even what's important here. What's important for the listening audience is that in the background, behind TJ, is two players running across the football field playing with squirt guns. And I just want to know, Nick, is Mike Norvell a dead man walking?
No. I think he's going to get another year because I think Michigan State is going to try and sell that last year was the real deal and that this year he just got the formula wrong. But he might have 3 games in the next season. Like I look at Notre Dame, I think Marcus Freeman is. Well,
that was my next question. Who is Norvell or is Marcus Freeman under more pressure the rest of the season?
You know, it's crazy. Notre Dame won 10 games last year.
Yeah.
I
didn't lose to NIU last year.
You know, Florida State was on the cusp of the playoff conversation the entire season last year. So it's wild how quickly things change. I think Freeman is probably under more pressure because he's also because, the whole point in elevating him was that you want to go ahead and you want to try and preserve what Brian Kelly, that the level that Brian Kelly was at. I think Marcus Freeman could end up winning 10 games this year and still get fired, which is insane. Like, you got to understand, like, Brian Kelly didn't maintain the consistent national level. Like, he would get one year they were in the playoff conversation, and then it'd be like 2 or 3 9-10 win years. You know what I mean? But, like, I mean, there are other things going against Marcus as well, given that Notre Dame's in the state of Indiana, given some of the politics of Notre Dame University that kind of have played out previously. So I think there's a lot of pressure, and it doesn't help that you're going into another weekend where Notre Dame should get the win this weekend, but I don't think it's guaranteed. And Riley Leonard has looked really bad in his 2 games as Notre Dame's head coach. So there's just a skosh more pressure and immediacy, the need to win for Marcus Freeman. I think it's a bit unfair, by the way.
So I will say this, because I said on Saturday that in the era of the 12-team playoff, Notre Dame, there's a chance they could bounce back from this and still make the playoff. But their schedule, especially with Florida State struggling the way that they are, like, they don't have like the toughest of schedules. The ranked teams they still play, at least as of now, are Louisville coming up here later in September. And then they play USC obviously to end the season, and we'll see what USC looks like at that point. But USC is just outside of being a top 10 team. So maybe it would have to come down to if they beat USC and USC is like number 8 or something in the country. That's the thing that gets them back in. But I don't know that it's a guarantee that even if they like run the table from here, especially if USC loses a couple games, then they're not really highly ranked anymore. I don't know that it's a guarantee that Notre Dame finds their way back into like the playoff picture necessarily, because this loss is going to hang on them the entire season. So I find that kind of interesting, and that'll obviously be a storyline we follow throughout the rest of the year.
So what's interesting about that, real quick, is I wonder if the expanded playoffs this year might cause boosters to be more gun shy on firing guys this season specifically, because that the bar has changed.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if Notre Dame is the 12 seed and gets bounced out in the first round, people are going to say they made the playoffs. You can't fire Marcus Freeman. You know what I mean? So, like, I think I think the playoffs are going to save a lot of coaches' jobs in that, that's 5 to 15 range, 20 range in the rankings going forward. But I wonder how many forward-thinking boosters are going to say, I already don't like this guy. If I have a chance, if I have a window early to get rid of him, whether it's at Notre Dame or any of these big schools, maybe we'll do that, because the risk of him having a 9-win season, 10-win season, making the playoffs, being one and done, and you feeling no closer to being a powerhouse, I wonder if that's a dynamic that's going to be specific to this year. And that's I don't know, but it's just kind of something I threw out there.
No, that's a good point.
That brings us to the 4th down, on 4-down territory. Spencer, right now, what's your top 5?
I would say my top 5 consists of Georgia would probably still be my number 1. I think Texas I would put ahead of Ohio State at this point, simply because of the quality of win that they have over Michigan, who I still think is a good team, not necessarily a great team. I would put Ohio State number 3, which I think is exactly what the AP poll has right now. So I'm not really being that creative here. But I'll tell you, I'll get creative now, because I think that a team that's getting maybe not entirely slept on, because they are in the top 10, but I think that people aren't paying enough attention to Tennessee. Tennessee has had a really good offense, as we know, these last couple of years. And I think this year under Josh Heupel, and they now have a defense that matches the offense. And so I think people should be paying close attention to Tennessee, to the point where I would probably put Tennessee in there as my number 4 team. And I know there's going to be a lot of people saying, like, well, Bama, Ole Miss, whatever. I actually think I would put Miami as the number 5 team in the country. I think Miami's really good. To me, they still have to prove it to me a little bit, because they haven't, everyone's wondering, like, they're doing the same thing they did with Texas all these years of, like, is Texas finally back? I think we're wondering that with Miami, and I think we're close to being able to confirm that. But, Mario Cristobal still has to show me some things in terms of winning games that are a little tighter and tougher opponents. But I think Miami's trending in the right direction. And that's a team right now, if I'm Ohio State, like, I'm afraid to play, because I just think Cam Ward is that damn good.
So I think it's Georgia and Texas for who's truly number 1, because I'm trying to base it off merit.
Yeah.
The difference is Texas beat Michigan more handily than Georgia beat Clemson. So even though one team came into the season ranked number 1, I'm actually going to put Texas 1. Then I'm going to go Georgia. Then I'm going to go Then I'll go Ohio State. Then I'm going to go Tennessee, because I agree with you. And Tennessee didn't just beat Dave Doran and NC State. They beat the holy crap out of them. And then I'm trying to think of the you know what? I'll be honest with you. I thought actually about putting USC there, because they got that week 1 win over LSU. I'm actually going to stick Oregon in there. And that's against, like, if it is a meritocracy, Oregon is eked by 2 teams they should have blown out. But I think Oregon is still one of the 3 most talented teams in college football. So I'll go Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee, and Oregon. But I will say, USC and Miami are in that conversation. There's a couple teams. You could, if we're going to say undefeated teams, Missouri's got a chance this weekend with Boston College to move up. Yeah, that's where I'm at with my top 5. How do you feel?
I think we're similar in a lot of these, but I can't put Oregon in there yet, because I think they have yet to sort of prove it on the field. And listen, I want to be clear too, because I think Boise State has one of the, probably, maybe you could argue, the best running back in the country potentially that's coming out, in Ashton Genty. Like, I think he's going to be really special on Sundays. And so, like, I don't want to discredit anything that Boise State did and kind of testing them. And it was the difference in that game was that there was that return, and the guy dropped, Oregon's player, I forget his name now, dropped the ball, and it was reviewed, and it looked like he didn't cross the plane with it. Like, it looked like it should have been ruled like a touchback for Boise State, and it wasn't. And, like, that could have changed that game entirely. We'd feel very differently about Oregon. But I'm just not there with Oregon yet. I think they need to look better, and they have some offensive line issues right now. But maybe they beat Ohio State, and that gets them back in the picture. But right now, I think I'd probably say Miami over them personally.
All right, guys, that is 4 Down territory. Please make sure to follow Sons of the Shoe wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, 923thefan.com, Odyssey. Have I mentioned our friends at Apple and Mr. Cook? Follow the Sons of the Shoe, please. Also, please make sure 923 The Fan's YouTube page. Find us, like our videos, like the playlist, all that kind of stuff. And make sure, Spencer and I been better now that we're back in football season to communicating with guys. Love to hear what you guys have to think. Are you having seller's remorse on Kyle McCord? Are you claiming Quinn Ewers? Who is your top 5 and why are ours stupid? So many things you guys can comment on, but we'll see you next week as we start to get you ready for Marshall. Until then, guys, thanks so much for stopping by. Go Bucks. Spencer, go Bucks.
Enjoy the bye week. Go Bucks.